So in this lecture, we will be examining the operation of this world system. So just to get a little bit of background, even at the end of the 4th millennium BC, as we have seen in previous lectures in this series, in this module, there were regional axial cores. You can imagine them as wheels operating in certain subcontinental and regional spaces. So just imagine one wheel of circulation in the greater Indus region, as we discussed in the last lecture. Imagine another wheel centered around the Sumerian region, so circling or rotating in the Mesopotamian arc, and maybe a third wheel in Egypt around the Nile. So these are three big axial core regions of the ancient world. Even by the end of the 4th millennium BC, so around 3000 BC, we already have these axial cores. And of course, there are smaller cores. You can think of the coast of the Eastern Mediterranean. You can think of the highlands of Iran, where the ancestors of the Elamite civilization are operating. So you can map out all these various axial cores. They are the centers around which this world system will operate. And we are going to bring in a little bit of theory as well in this lecture onwards, primarily world systems theory, to examine this first world system. So the first thing that we bring in from world system theories is, why do we refer to these regions as axial cores? Now remember, world systems theory said that certain regions, once they are integrated into a structure of accumulation, that is a vertical structure of accumulation of wealth, which extracts wealth from various regions and brings it all together in a center, then you have an integrated core. Right, so we spoke about how granaries accumulate wealth. We spoke about how elite, say in places like Mehergarh, they bring in precious metals and precious stones and precious gems from far away to accumulate wealth for themselves. And then we spoke about large cities emerging, large walled cities, and how those cities, they bring in trade and industry and production. And these are main capital cities. So they're accumulating wealth from a wider and wider region, and more wealth into these cores, these capital cities. And who lives at the capital cities? Certain elites. So certain elites are building a structure of accumulation that draws in wealth from these faraway regions. And generally these structures of accumulation are confined to certain scales. So there are some natural geographic boundaries, especially such as seas or high mountains, that ancient civilizations are not able to circumvent. So there are some natural boundaries that these elites have to operate within the confines of to build their structures of accumulation. And that is where we bring in the second lesson of world systems theory, the lesson of scale. So remember, in my second lecture on world systems theory, I spoke about various scales. You might have scales on which a polity might be located. So you might have a civilizational scale polity, you might have a regional scale polity, or you might have even a tribal polity. So generally, the vaster a polity is, the vaster scale a polity has, naturally, the vaster and richer its structure of accumulation will be. So these three cores are, in a sense, the vastest scale polities existing at this point of time in history. And therefore, naturally, they are the most powerful. For how these cores are created and how this integration happens, we need to go into the details, the nitty-gritties, the nuts and bolts of state building. And that is something we might do in the future. But just think in terms of infrastructure. The more infrastructure you're able to build, the more labor you're able to command to build that infrastructure. The more physical power that you're able to have, the armies that you're able to organize, the more efficient you are at creating these structures of accumulation. Of course, there are other things like ideology and religion even, and gods play an important role in this integration. So we can discuss all of this in detail, but right now we are focused on the bigger picture. So returning to world systems theory, the interesting thing that world systems theory mentions is, once you see the emergence of these grand civilizational scale cores, then if these civilizational cores have the capacity to interact with each other, first of all, that capacity is determined by technology, and secondly also by a will, in a sense, to circumvent long spaces and find new people to interact with. And that is the question of human initiative, which we keep pointing out is also important in geopolitics and geohistory. So if these cores have the interaction capacity and the will to contact other civilizations, then something interesting begins to happen. Then these different cores, these different rotating wheels, they begin to synchronize and currents begin to flow between them, currents of trade and exchange, and you have the emergence of a world system. And this world system allows the emergence of a global elite. So, an elite who is even more powerful than a civilizational scale elite. Because this elite is able to accumulate wealth not just from its own civilization, but through contacts with another civilization or another axial core. He's able to extract wealth globally. And do we see this happening now? Think of Egypt, right? In Egypt, where you have the most centralized state. You begin to find in this third millennium BC the pharaohs of Egypt building grander and grander monuments and importing jewelry, importing precious stones such as jade from as far away as China, and also lapis lazuli from the frontiers of the Indus Valley civilization, and of course gold and other precious jewels from the south. But again, we should not remain focused on the materialist aspect of history. Remember, these interactions also have consequences and implications not just for the elite but also for the common people. Because these interactions, they lead to the development and the sharing and even the emergence of common world-scale cultures. So you have the emergence of culture that circumvents this limitation, the geographic limitation of civilizations, and you have the emergence of a world culture. So one of the greatest scholars of world systems theory, in fact, Andre Gunder Frank, says that we, in fact, even now are living in the world system which began 5,000 years ago. So in the third millennium BC, the world entered into a new and unique era of political and economic integration. This occurred in a region that we might call Middle Eurasia, which spans South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, the Middle East, the Eastern Mediterranean, Northern Africa, Arabia, and also parts of Central Asia. So in this zone of interaction, we see the emergence of a shared global world culture, which is manifested in shared artifacts, in various objects of trade and exchange, but also in design motifs. And all this is displayed, all this is documented, even in the written record we have from the Mesopotamian civilization. So this new era was of course building on all the gradual and incremental and even some revolutionary technological and social and economic changes which are happening in the past 3 or even 4,000 years. But now around 3000 BC, there was a geotechnological breakthrough, and there was in a sense the first maritime revolution. Contacts between these civilizations and between these regions were developed through shipping and shipping lanes which extended from the Arabian Sea through the Persian Gulf and then of course across the Arabian Sea into the Red Sea. So here in fact we see the interaction of geotechnology, technology which allows you to control the geo or space of the world, with geoeconomics, which is economic interaction across space, and the use of the integration of geotechnology and geoeconomics for the creation of geopolitical power.